She was married at 12, pregnant by 13, a child stripped of innocence and thrown into a world of ruthless power plays, royal deception, and unbearable expectations. But from behind streaked cheeks and a fragile frame, a storm was brewing. This is not just the story of a girl lost to history. It's the rise of a queen who would defy every chain forged by tradition and tyranny. Betrayed by those sworn to protect her, silenced in courts dominated by men, she learned to wield her silence like a weapon. This is where pain gave birth to power. Her enemies called her weak until she ruled over them. Her suffering became strategy. Her tears, a crown. This is the haunting transformation of a broken child into the most powerful woman England had ever seen. You think you know her story, but you've only heard the whispers. Now hear the roar. When she was just 12 years old, she stood at the altar dressed in a gown too heavy for her small frame, with hands that still trembled like a child's. Because she was one. But in her world, girlhood wasn't protected. It was sold. Traded for alliances, titles, and treaties. She didn't choose her husband. She didn't understand the vows. Yet from that moment, she was no longer seen as a daughter or a dreamer. She was a wife, expected to bear heirs, expected to obey. At 13, her body carried the weight of motherhood, though her heart still longed for dolls and lullabies. There were no celebrations, no childhood memories, no gentle years. Only the cold stone walls of duty. But it's in those silent, suffering years that something unshakable began to form. She wasn't just surviving. She was remembering. Every whispered betrayal, every tear, every moment they thought they'd broken her. They didn't see it, but something inside her was learning, was watching. The crown may have rested on her husband's head, but the fire of a future ruler had already been lit within her. That girl, forced to grow up far too soon, would become a woman they could never again control. She wasn't just their queen. She was their reckoning. And in the end, the child they silenced became the voice history would never forget. At 13, her name was written in royal ledgers, not as a child of promise, but as a vessel for heirs. The court called it destiny. But what kind of destiny leaves a child hunched over in pain, learning to cradle both fear and life inside her young body? While other girls were playing in sunlit gardens, she was bleeding in silence, hidden behind thick curtains and thicker expectations. She wasn't ready, no child is, and yet no one asked. Her cries were dismissed as weakness, her silence mistaken for obedience. Every morning she woke not as herself, but as someone else's purpose, someone else's property. Yet through the shadows of those days, something deeper began to stir. Pain didn't crush her, it carved her. With every contraction, with every sleepless night, she learned not just endurance but focus. She learned to read faces, to hear the words behind words, to survive without complaint. They thought they had taken everything from her, but they had given her something. They didn't even realize perspective. She saw clearly now. The crown wasn't just about bloodlines or birthright. It was about who could endure what others could not. And endure she did. That broken little girl became the steel beneath a throne, because the ones who suffer in silence often rise the loudest when history finally listens. In a court full of voices, hers was the one no one wanted to hear. She learned quickly that speaking out brought punishment, not power. So she stopped speaking and started listening. Really listening. While others played politics with loud declarations and louder lies, she stood still, silent, and invisible. But invisibility in her hands became an advantage. No one suspects the quiet one. No one notices the girl in the corner watching everything. And she watched men betray each other over wine. She watched alliances form with a handshake and fall apart in a single glance. She watched how power moved, not with brute force, but with subtlety, with silence, with precision. And in that silence, she sharpened herself. She learned who lied easily, who panicked under pressure, who underestimated a girl with tear-streaked cheeks. Her silence was never weakness, it was strategy. She let them speak, let them boast, let them believe they held all the cards. Because she knew something they didn't. Knowledge is power, and she was collecting it like currency. Every conversation became a lesson, every insult a reminder. She was studying the game so that one day she'd play it better than anyone else. And when the time came to speak, she didn't raise her voice. She raised a kingdom. There was a moment quiet, maybe even unnoticed by those around her, when everything changed. Not in some grand declaration or royal ceremony, but in the stillness of her own mind. She realized she didn't have to wait to be given power. She could take it, slowly, deliberately, like slipping a blade from beneath silk. It began with small choices. Who to trust, when to stay silent, when to speak just enough. She started shaping the space around her. Not as a child anymore, not as a wife or mother, but as a strategist, a player. While others wasted time flaunting titles, she was building alliances. Where they played for glory, she played for survival, and for something greater. She began to influence outcomes without needing credit. Her fingerprints were on decisions no one even knew she touched, and the more she maneuvered, the more dangerous she became. Not because she was ruthless, but because she was precise. Calculated, controlled, she didn't need to shout, didn't need to prove herself. She let others underestimate her, and then made her move when they least expected it. The throne wasn't something she begged for. It was something she quietly walked toward, while everyone else was looking the other way. And by the time they realized what she had become, it was already too late. When the crown finally came to rest on her head, it wasn't handed to her. It was claimed, piece by piece, through years of quiet endurance and calculated strength. By then, she didn't need anyone's approval. She had studied every move, survived every betrayal, and watched others fall trying to take what she now wore with terrifying grace. Her rule didn't begin with celebration, it began with resistance. They still saw her as the fragile girl from years before, the one they thought would break under pressure. But they hadn't seen the fire she'd been feeding in silence. She didn't rule through fear or favor. She ruled through unshakable clarity. Every law she passed, every alliance she forged, carried the weight of someone who knew what it meant to have no voice. She remembered every door that had been shut on her, and she opened those doors with iron resolve, not for pity, but for legacy. Her strategies were sharper than any sword, her restraint more threatening than rage. The throne didn't change her. It revealed her. The same girl they tried to silence became the mind they now feared, the leader they had no choice but to follow. Because real power doesn't shout, it moves in silence, then speaks only when the world is ready to listen. Years later, when history began to write her name in ink instead of whispers, it didn't tell the story of a girl who was lucky. It told the story of a woman who endured. She wasn't remembered for the jewels she wore or the titles she carried, but for the battles she never let the world see. The real power of her legacy wasn't in her reign, it was in the transformation. She took everything they used to break her, shame, silence, loss, and turned it into the very foundation of her rule. The world expected her to follow the path laid before her, but she carved her own, one step at a time, often in the dark. And because she did, others followed. Daughters, mothers, queens, women who'd been told they were too soft, too young, too small for the weight of leadership, saw themselves in her shadow and stood taller because of it. She wasn't just a monarch, she became a mirror, a reminder that pain can be power, and that survival is more than staying alive. It's choosing to rise when no one expects you to. Her story didn't end with a coronation. It began there, because what she built wasn't just a legacy. It was a challenge to every system that said she couldn't. And in the end, she didn't just wear the crown. She redefined what it meant to earn one. She began as a name no one bothered to remember, just another girl lost to silence, to sacrifice, to the shadows of men's ambition. But through the years, through the pain, Through the battles no one saw, she rose, not by chance, not by mercy, but by choice, by grit, by sheer, unshakable will. She was never just a victim of her time. She became the force that shaped it. And when history finally turned to face her, it didn't see the broken child they once discarded. It saw the woman who rewrote the meaning of power. So let them tell their stories of kings and conquerors. We'll remember the girl who became a queen and made the crown bow to her.